Objective signs of gambling harm. So these are signs that you might be able to see from a distance instead of asking your clients have they got a gambling problem or trying to get that information. These are ways that, say, a family member might be able to pick up that this is a risk. Increasing amount of problems in spite of having adequate income. So you get adequate income coming in, but I simply having to borrow money from friends a lot more, and a lot of plausible stories. Unexplained absences. So where have you been? I just went for a long walk, sort of thing. Same yesterday. Where have you been? So a lot of people think that the gamblers are having affairs. It sounds like that, but in actual fact they're often, there's the third person in the relationship as the gambler. Okay, deterioration of mood, so often mood and appearance. People often get depressed, so you can imagine if you're excited a lot of the time and then depressed, excited, depressed, the brain doesn't handle that very well, so we can easily drop into depression if we, that's part of what's happening, if we don't, if we stop gambling, it becomes then having to gamble in order to lift ourselves out of that depression. There's some biological things happening around gambling, and that we are starting to get used. Our homeostasis is around getting used to high levels of, say, adrenaline going through our central nervous system, and if we don't have that, then life gets very boring. So a lot of clients will go and say, I'm bored a lot of the time. I just have to create something that is more exciting. So sometimes they get more bored, it actually drifts into depression and they stop looking after themselves. Raising credit for loans with promises to pay back that are not met, goes without saying. Minimising to others the time, telling others, I don't spend that much time or much money. So they're quite defensive around it. So just so you understand what is someone that would meet gambling disorder, we used to call it pathological gambling in DSM-4. We used to call it, when we first formed which is now the Problem Gambling Foundation, when we first formed this back in 1992, we called it the Compulsive Gambling Society. And now, compulsive, when we had that after a few years, we thought, that doesn't sound very nice, compulsiveness. So we then went into problem gambling. Sort of thing. Okay, so if 4 of any of these, continued thoughts of gambling, creating opportunities to get money to play. In other words, a preoccupation. So a lot of people, as with drugs, will be thinking about where do I get the money to play, or sitting there running all the past wins through our heads. But if you're sitting next to a person that's done a lot of gambling, they'll be looking quite bored, distracted, and you might have to talk to them a couple of times before they say, what were you talking to me, sort of thing, because that sort of ruminating thoughts around their gambling is quite priority. They'll find that often there's an increased amount of money they have to spend, or increased amount of time they have to spend on gambling to enjoy it to the same extent. In other words, we're still developing a tolerance. A lot of these things were simply taken wholesaling out of the drugs criteria, but they seem to fit. Unsuccessfully try to cut back or stop because we slip up. That's a sign of dependence, isn't it? Becomes irritable or abusive when when loses money, or she loses money, or blames bad luck when trying to control. And we might take that as it's effectively withdrawal because we're not winning. And so it's starting to feel as though we're not getting the high that we want out of the gambler. If we self-medicate with gambling, in other words, it becomes our prime way that we can either switch off problems, or we can distract ourselves, or not only distract, but raise some hope for the future. In other words, excitement in our life. If it starts getting to be the only way that we deal with it, and we do this with other drugs, with drugs as well. Specific to gambling is chasing losses. We often feel it's an insult to our self-esteem if we lose money, especially if we believe we have a skill or luck. So if we lose money, it's almost like we say, what an idiot I am, or they've ripped me off, or something. I'm going to get the money back. When I get the money back, I'll prove to everyone that I wasn't a fool, and I'll certainly prove to myself that I'm better than everyone else at this game. So covering up or lying because of the amount or fear of being told. So a lot of clients will go and say, oh, my husband or wife is a compulsive liar. They'll say they're a pathological liar. Often it's because they're trying to hide it because they can't handle the criticism, but often it's because they've got so many secrets. And a lot of our clients are really isolated compared with a person that might have, say, a drug problem alone. And many of our clients have a drug problem plus gambling as well. Lost relationships, jobs, career opportunities. So you probably get quite often students, for example. You get a lot of students coming in, and their career goes downhill. Their grades go completely badly. Again, they get focused on the here and now. In fact, it's boring. People will say they keep reading the same page over and over again, and why won't it sink in? It's because their mind's somewhere else. Having to ask people to gamble, I think I said that before, it's commonplace. We often get the point, and so being bailed out is not a good thing because we don't learn the consequences of our gambling. Treatment of gambling harm, well, often the best approach is it's a complex disorder, so we shouldn't just try and deal with one way. So a lot of gamblers will say, is there medication I can take that will stop my gambling? Now we can do that sometimes with drug problems, but the biological side of it, we haven't found antidepressants, but they might help for a little while, but it only helps because the person that's a gambler has also got depression. And many of our clients will have depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems. Psychologically, well, we condition ourselves into believing we're going to win. Social, well, we hang around places where there's gambling machines or casinos or around friends that do the same. So we often have to have a pretty wide, eclectic model of what we're looking at in order to change these behaviours and to, I think, let our clients know what we're actually doing. Raise their awareness of that it's not as simple putting too much money on. It's more than that. Includes motivational interviewing, so we often have to not tell people what they have to do. Having said that research we're doing at the moment, which is motivational interviewing versus CBT, the CBT seems to be working remarkably well, where we're just saying, this is what you do, next thing you do this. Whereas the motivational interviewing will be trying to get them to think and come up with the ideas that we're guiding into their belief system. So we can use cognitive restructuring, in other words, change the way that people have habitual thinking. So if we can do that, that can work quite well. We can challenge unhelpful belief systems in many ways. We can even try little experiments to go and change that. The illusion of control. Commonly people believe that they can control the system and win. But even intelligent people can come up with really good arguments about why they could win. Gambler's fallacy, we often bring that up. What is the gambler? Who's got the gambler's fallacy? What does that mean? Gambler's fallacy is simply believing that what's happened in the past will predict the future. So if I've done this, this and this, and I won, I will be able to do that and I will win in the future. So often people will sit at a gambling machine and think, all right, it's not paid out for 3 hours with anything significant. So in the past I've found that after a long period of time a win comes up. Well, theoretically that could easily happen. It's just that the time it's taken to come up you will have lost a lot more money than the win. So people will often think long periods of time predict a big win about to start. So they'll tell themselves this in many cases. So yes, past events influence. I often come up with my friend who is a lawyer who has he gambles up at the casino once a year on roulette. Roulette is no chance of winning on roulette, let me tell you. But he will go and wait until on the bar it's either 6 or 7 reds or 6 or 7 blacks in a row. Once he knows that they've got a sequence there, he bets on the opposite colour. Why is he doing that? What's his logic there? This is a wealthy lawyer.
Chance, possibilities.
So why possibilities? Wouldn't it, if it's got 7 black in a row, Why does he think it's going to be a red? Well, wouldn't it be another black? Gee, black's on a roll.
Right.
Better chance probably.
Chance? Yeah, his theory is that over time, equal number of reds and blacks will come up. On a chance factor, he said, this is a, I say, well, what does that follow? And he said, well, chance, this is what happens. Yeah, that's the way chance does work, but it's not logical that you can beat chance. You can't, unless you've got a bottomless amount of money. I mean, otherwise you'd have to double up. We know that you keep doubling up each week. Each time you come to a bet, it's the only way you can get to the front. But after you've doubled up about 20 times, you're into millions of dollars. So start with $1, then 2, 4, 8, 16. Before you know it, you're getting up to huge amounts. People back off because they don't have the money.
But the casino also have those paper and pen provided to them to people think they will have chance to win.
Yep.
They write down numbers. That's
Oh, they
just
will, yeah.
terribly
They're encouraging
false
people to,
belief.
yeah, that's it. It's great, isn't it? You know, just, here we go. We're not going to criticize your belief system, but this will help you, sort of thing. But it is, isn't it? It's encouraging people to do something they know is going to lose the money.
Is that the illusion of control?
Yep, that's
Yeah.
illusion of control. That's exactly it. Yeah, so addressing budgeting or control of spending, that's one of the things if you're in Australia, when they first started, we went over there after 1992, over there 93, for the first set of people they had, where they started funding treatment of problem gambling, about a year after us, they hired, everyone had to have had to have a budgeting degree, and then they trained them to be gambling counsellors. So they started off saying the most important thing you have to do is, the only reason people have gambling problems is because they can't budget. They have this, what do you think? Is that what we should do? That's a pretty simplistic sort of belief system, wasn't it? Went back about a year later, all the budgeters are gone, and they had all counsellors by then. That didn't work. Addressing other coexisting issues, we do that, don't we? Because if a person's depressed and they've learned to lift their depression by the hope of winning, and for a while there they get rid of ruminating thoughts by gambling, it works for them. So maybe we have to address the depression as well, otherwise they're going to simply relapse, or the anxiety, or the alcohol, and the many other things that happen. So we often look to coexisting problems. That's why we do a big screen of everything we can. And we shouldn't, in the screening, we shouldn't pick our screens we're going to give clients because we think, oh no, you might, I remember you were talking about having a drink, so you can do an alcohol screen. Whereas you haven't talked about drinking, so we won't bother with an alcohol screen. Don't do that. Screen everyone, because otherwise you're doing false negatives. Very commonplace. So commonly identified coexisting issues will result in a relapse. We know that from research, so we should screen for everything we can. Psychological problems especially. We have suicidal ideation. If you put alcohol with gambling problems, both of those together, you'll sort of double or more the risk of suicide. So you need to screen for alcohol and other drug problems. Depression. Virtually everyone that ends their life, it goes without saying, is clinically depressed. Alcohol and other drug problems, impulsiveness, all of those things, as I said, shut off the limbic system from the prefrontal cortex, so they don't think about the consequences. Social problems. Social problems are really important. Poor support. You know, if I was going to say, who's got the most risk? Someone living in Auckland for suicide, or someone living on a farm down in the Wairarapa? Who's got the highest risk?
The rural, probably.
Rural, why?
Less access to services, well, there is less services.
Right.
Isolated possibly.
Yeah, that's it. And yet a lot of people will say, but living with a whole lot of other people stresses people out, doesn't it? No, it's a safety factor. Socialisation is really important. So yeah, so social problems, isolation, poor support, criminal offending is high risk. A lot of gamblers I've had that have got the police hovering around have high risk of suicide. Work and accommodation problems. Look what happened down in, where was it, Thames. Suddenly a big work provider in Thames suddenly closes. People have been working there for 30 years and there's no other jobs there. And suddenly their life's gone, as far as they're concerned. Their future's gone. 3 generations were working there. And for a lot of those people, they're at high risk of developing gambling problems. And when they do, they've got a high risk of ending their lives. Biological, we need to know more about the biological effects of gambling. We know that certainly it increases dopamine when you gamble, which is a reward feeling. So maybe we could give people L-Dopa or something like that. In fact, they do that for people with Parkinson's disease. They get a dopamine enhancer, and they're more likely to develop a gambling problem, they've found, even though they haven't done much gambling in the past. Or they develop lax sexual behaviours, and the medical companies have been sued for that at the moment. So we will know more about gambling and the biological effects in the future. Some antidepressants, mood stabilisers work really well to stop people, but they don't last. You know, people taking antidepressants have a lot of stress taken off, get rid of the ruminating, they don't have to gamble in order to switch off, they feel okay. 3 months later they drift back into gambling. So we often need some talking therapy to make it work. And we might be able to reduce some cravings, and we're doing a big piece of research at the moment to try and get people to tolerate cravings.
Yeah, can I ask? Because I hear that in Great Britain they're actually giving out medication for people who are...
Yeah, they give naltrexone out. Naltrexone is an opiate blocker, so
Yeah.
if you have a heroin addiction, you're often given an opiate blocker like that, just don't get that enjoyment out of it, so it takes away a lot of the urge. And they've started giving it to people with alcohol addiction, and in Australia, doctors will have been given in their appropriate interventions, use naltrexone for problem gamblers. It's acknowledged that this may be a suitable medication, but that's the only one they said.
And they haven't started here in New Zealand.
No, naltrexone is quite expensive, and again you have to watch out because sometimes it builds up. If you have a poor functioning liver, it'll build up to a toxic level, so you have to be checked on a regular basis for the first 3 weeks. So it's not something you can just keep taking, otherwise you can sort of poison yourself. So you need a broad approach to identify what is harm and not just focus on the gambling itself. We can use different acknowledged therapies such as CBT. We can try and get people to identify risk factors or how to react, or practice being able to avoid problems, or addressing automatic thoughts, negative thoughts, because we might believe that our whole world's going to the pack, so that will reinforce it if we, it's something we want to escape from. We often believe when we take away our addiction that people will feel better eventually, but they don't. In actual fact, people feel they're all at sea if they don't have some sort of coping mechanism. And sometimes they're using gambling as a coping mechanism. We often think of addictions as dysfunctional, but they're often dysfunctional coping mechanisms. They help people deal with their depression, their anxiety. For a while, it works in the short term. So if you take away the gambling, sometimes the anxiety or the depression rises right up and they can't tolerate it, so they relapse. So ongoing support is important. Take into account coexisting conditions that will be interacting with the gambling when it comes down to it. Address family and whānau dynamics. Often people stop trusting gamblers when they identify. Sometimes a lot of times they'll go and say, we don't trust you anymore because we can't tell you if you're gambling or not. You've lied to us so much in the past. So often with family members, we can say, well, this is part of the addiction. People lie as part of the addiction. It's not the person there. Everyone will do this that has this addiction for a while until they recover. Trying to get problem gamblers to be really honest is hard, but you can challenge them and say, all right, this, the difference is by lying you put off the bad moment. By telling you the truth, you get the negative reaction straight away, but you've put off the long-term risk of a worse reaction.